Okay, so this should be live. Let's see how it goes. Greetings to everybody watching live or watching on replay, assuming that the replay even happens. Coming to you live from lovely, humid and stifling South Korea today. I had to turn off my AC to do this live stream, so it's already getting a little bit rough in here. Um, so I decided to try to do this channel with more live stream content rather than with set video content for a couple of reasons. One is that that's kind of what YouTube supports, but another is that it seems it's just more conducive to my personality. I kind of like to think on my feet more. When I have a set video that I'm doing, I'm always questioning it, trying to perfect it, do more. And uh, I'd rather just sort of go off the cuff and let it fly, let it rip, and then just see what happens afterwards. There's actually a third reason for doing the live stream, and that's the book that I'm going to talk a little bit about today, which is Joseph Conrad's Lord Jim. Um, I was reading this book, and something in it um, uh, it made me made me think. Uh, it made me realize that I needed to uh, apply myself a little more. I'm actually going to share the passage with you that uh, that made me convinced that I should should do this. So here's the passage I just cut and pasted here. So in this passage, it's early in the book. If you haven't read the book, it was published around the year 1900. So it's very much a late 19th century book, and it's set. Well, the settings vary, but it's basically in uh, the uh, the sea of East Asia, basically. Um, and at one point early in the book, he describes a couple of different kinds of people that you would meet if you were to go to some of these exotic ports. And he describes these two types of people. One of them, he says, some, very few, and seen there but seldom, led mysterious lives, had preserved an undefaced energy with the temper of buccaneers and the eyes of dreamers. They appeared to live in a crazy maze of plans, hopes, dangers, enterprises, ahead of civilization in the dark places of the sea, and their death was the only event of their fantastic existence that seemed to have a reasonable certitude of achievement. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I have been living as an expat for the last 10 years, teaching at various universities overseas. And there are this type of person is you can see among the expats. I've known a couple exactly like this. Very odd characters. The one I can think of, the most distinct, um, might have even been manic depressive in his combination of wild dreams, then also depressive episodes. His his death does seem to be the only thing that has a reasonable certitude of achievement, as opposed to all his various plans. And he had many plans. Maybe he still has plans. I don't know. Um, but it's the second type. It's the second type that really got me. The majority. The majority were men who, like himself, thrown there by accident, had remained as officers of country ships. They had now a horror of the home service with its harder conditions, severer view of duty, and the hazard of stormy oceans. They were attuned to the eternal peace of eastern sky and sea. They loved short passages, good deck chairs, large native crews, and the distinction of being white. They shuddered at the thought of hard work and led precariously easy lives, always on the verge of dismissal, always on the verge of engagement. Serving Chinamen, Arabs, half castes would have served the devil himself had he made it easy enough. They talked everlastingly of turns of luck, how so and so got charge of a boat on the coast of China, a soft thing, how this one had an easy billet in Japan somewhere, and that one was doing well in the Siamese Navy. And in all they said, in their actions, in their looks, in their persons, could be detected the soft spot, the place of decay, the determination to lounge safely through existence. Let me tell you, folks, that hurt. That hurt when I read that, because that is absolutely a perfect description of a certain type of expat, and actually has been a pretty good description of me for the past 5 or 6 years. The determination to lounge safely through existence. And that was the line that made me think, you know what? Uh, I've got to apply myself more. I've been writing books and publishing them, but I've got to get back to the podcast. And so it is a spot of decay. I have been trying to lounge safely through existence a bit too much. Um, and as I read in the book, there was more to it than just that. Actually, I thought there was something interesting in it, for particularly for people who are interested in more non-mainstream content, maybe dissident content, um, because there is an interesting the if you haven't read the book, the main idea of the book is the titular character, the Jim of the title. Um, he undergoes an experience in the book where he's a mate on a ship that's carrying a load of about 800 um, I guess Arab but also Southeast Asian pilgrims. They're taking from somewhere to somewhere in the Red Sea, and at night their ship, which is barely seaworthy as it is, runs into something rather heavy, and it damages the ship. And when they check the bulkhead, the front bulkhead of the ship, there's already water in the compartment, and the bulkhead looks like it's about to give way. And so the white crew of the ship panic, and they get on a lifeboat, and they abandon the ship basically. And Jim, even though he knows he shouldn't do that, and it's never directly stated, but the implication is clear that you don't, out of fear, abandon your duty, right? And you certainly don't do this as a white man in the 19th century. You stand by your duty regardless, even in the face of death. But the three other members who get in the lifeboat, they're sort of described. The Marlowe character who tells part of the story, and it's, I believe, the same Marlowe from Heart of Darkness, by the way, who tells that story. The same Marlowe. He describes these other three as they're nobodies. They're not men of honor. They're not gentlemen. So, okay, they ran away. That's maybe to be expected. But Jim is described as one of us. He's a gentleman. He is a man of honor, but he jumps into the sea, jumps into the boat, and runs away with the rest. And the book becomes about how do you sort of rebuild yourself after that? Like, is that even possible? So there was a naval disaster here in Korea about 8 years ago called the Seawall Ferry disaster. You can look that one up, where a captain and crew abandoned a ship that foundered and was sinking, and it had a load of I think college or maybe high school kids, had kids on it, and they just let it sink. They abandoned the abandoned the ship. And the Korean Coast Guard actually also failed in their duty. They didn't come rescue them. What happened is some people, some children on the ship, using their cell phones, were able to get through to some people on shore and saying our ship is sinking and no one is coming to help us. And some fishermen basically came and saved some of the passengers from drowning. But a bunch of people were drowned. And the captain got away. And when you're dishonored in this way in East Asia, there is a way to handle it. The way you handle it is you kill yourself, suicide. Like that's it. And actually, that in Lord Jim, that way out is glanced at, because there's a couple of times uh, where Jim thought, he says when he's in the rowboat, he thinks about just killing himself, but he doesn't do it. The idea of suicide as a way of reclaiming your lost honor is not it's not as appealing in Western culture as in Eastern culture. Now, if you go further back, for the Romans, it was a thing, but as Hamlet explains in Hamlet, the Almighty has fixed his canon against self-slaughter. There is a more negative view of suicide in the West, which makes it less of a way out, less of a way of reclaiming your honor. Is there even a way to do that? Well, that's kind of what the book is about. Um, and at one point in the book, Marlowe he takes this kid under his wing a little bit. He believes that it can be done. He believes this kid can rebuild a life for himself. And he goes to see this Bavarian that he knows in some just remote area, Patusan or something like that. And there's a wonderful passage where he talks to this Bavarian about, tries to get his help in helping him sort of rebuild his life in some way. And there's a very great passage where the Bavarian, he explains the situation. The Bavarian says, "There is only one remedy. One thing alone can us from being ourselves cure." And when I read this, I realized that this doesn't just apply to Jim, that this is in a way a comment about the human situation generally. And that's part of the genius of this book, is that in writing about Jim kind of trying to create a life for himself, it's also about human beings in general trying to create a life for ourselves, because we're all kind of thrown into life in this way. And then he goes on, Marlowe replies a little bit later, "Yes," said I, "strictly speaking, the question is not how to get cured, but how to live." Yeah. In general, adapting the words of your great poet, Hamlet again, that is the question. How to be. How to be. Okay? And then he goes on to say, "We want in so many different ways to be," he began again. "This magnificent butterfly," he has a butterfly collection, "finds a little heap of dirt and sits still on it. But man, he will never on his heap of mud keep still. He want to be so, and again he want to be so." He moved his hand up, then down. "He wants to be a saint, and he wants to be a devil. And every time he shuts his eyes, he sees himself as a very fine fellow, so fine as he can never be in a dream. Yes, very funny this terrible thing is. A man that is born falls into a dream like a man who falls into the sea. If he tries to climb out into the air, as inexperienced people endeavor to do, he drowns. Nicht wahr? No, I tell you, the way is to the destructive element submit yourself, and with the exertions of your hands and feet in the water, make the deep, deep sea keep you up." So this is not just a comment, obviously, about Jim, but a comment that is in a way about us and how to live. To the destructive element, submit yourself. Um, and I think that ties in a little bit to the sense of decay in the men of the second type described earlier in the book, the men who just want to lounge easily through life. But that's not really how you engage with life. You have to kind of submit yourself to the destructive element. And that's kind of what I'm doing here in this podcast. submitting myself to the destructive element of chance, randomness, making mistakes, but also I had to put some effort into it as well. Probably one or two people are going to watch total. It might fail, but that's kind of how you have to go through life in a way. And there's another element to this that I want to bring in. So earlier I referenced people who are more interested in, let's say, non-mainstream or dissident content. Well, a common figure that emerges in such circles is Oswald Spengler. Uh, Obviously, his Decline of the West, very influential work, um, and a lot of people in our circles tend to look at things and wonder, okay, maybe he was right. Maybe this civilization is sort of on its last legs. And Spengler has this notion of our civilization, the one that we're currently in, as a Faustian civilization, right? A striving towards the infinite. With all there's a positive dimension to this, but there's also a negative and destructive dimension uh, to this as well. Um, but one criticism that I would offer of uh, Spengler, and with all respect, I mean, obviously he's much smarter than me, but one criticism of his analysis is that I feel his take on civilizations treats them too much as isolated from others and isolated in time. And so you start to lose senses of continuity which might be there. So, what do I mean by that? Well, he understands the modern Faustian civilization as a different civilization from the Greek and Roman, but it does owe some things to that earlier civilization. And in fact, I think there's a very significant continuity with that civilization. There's some element that is Western that precedes our Faustian civilization and will probably last beyond it. There's something about the West that is not summed up in that view because, again, because that Faustian view is it's just too isolated from other civilizations and too isolated in time. And what that element is the element that we see on display in these passages from Conrad. It's this element of feeling oneself in the light, feeling oneself in a true perspective rather than one of many perspectives. So I had an Indian friend um, that I talked with once about great books. So we were doing a great books program, and he mentioned that that doesn't exist in India. Like they don't call it that. They have their own like classic works, but they refer to them as the books of tradition, meaning of our tradition. And what he was pointing at is that there's a different sense in the Western mind of what these books of tradition are. We don't call them that. We call them great because we believe they are great simply, regardless of perspective and regardless of uh, uh, orientation. They're just good on their own. And probably one of the best clear examples of this view is from Thucydides' history, where um, he says, I haven't tried to, use rhetoric to dress up my book and make it wonderful because he's like, my interest is not in garnering the applause of the moment. I intend my work to be a possession for all time. Okay, so Thucydides has this concept of, people who want to understand history and learn from history because it will help them understand not only the past, but the present and the future. This work will be useful for you. It will be useful simply. It is, in a way, in the light. It is, in the sense, it partakes of truth in some very essential way. And I think Conrad sees his own work in a similar way as offering a commentary about human life and how to create a human life that's not just applicable to his own century or his own race or whatever, but is applicable beyond that. It is also a possession for all time in a similar way. And I think this concept of things is something that it's part of our civilization. It survived from this other civilization, and it will probably outlive the decline that I think we can all see that we're living through now. And that's why I think trying to look at these fragments is useful, because we are looking at these little pearls that have been saved in a way from time and trying to preserve them, trying to continue preserving them. And the reason why we do this is because there will be something that survives. Just like when a house burns down, it's usually not entirely burned down or entirely destroyed. There usually is something that can be preserved. And that's what I'm trying to do. And there's a certain hard work in preserving it. But again, you have to sort of, to the destructive element, submit yourselves if you want to preserve things. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this first episode, this first podcast episode. I'm gonna try to keep these all at maybe around 20 to 30 minutes when I'm going solo. I don't think people need to listen to me for much longer than that. Thank you for tuning in, and if you're listening to this later on YouTube, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.